Hello and welcome to this week's Cyberside Chats. Today we're going to talk about the recent federal funding cuts for CISA, our nation's cybersecurity agency. And I think the question is, number one, who is CISA and why do we care? And then what does this mean for us? Because CISA is more than just any old government agency. They're really like a backbone of our nation's cybersecurity. They do all these critical cybersecurity services. And before 2018, when they were founded, things were not as mature. Like, do you remember the dark days before the known and exploited vulnerabilities catalog?
I have chosen to not think about those days at this point.
I remember thinking, why do we need a government agency? And now I'm like, what would we do without them?
Yeah, the first ransomware attack I ever dealt with was in 2015, and if we had had something like CISA, there's a good chance that at least there would have been some way to thwart that.
Well, and having a central place to track vulnerabilities and to make sure that they're assigned numbers properly and things like that has really helped us have a coordinated response. And now we're at the point where our society relies on CISA in order to function. Like, your vulnerability scanners will not function without the funding and the work that CISA provides. So let's dig into that, because we're seeing funding cuts in a variety of areas. Number one is cuts to staff, cuts in funding to information sharing centers, the ISACs. We almost had cuts to the CVE tracking system, to MITRE, the organization that tracks that, which would have been absolutely devastating. And at the 11th hour, that was saved temporarily, but not forever. So we're going to dig into all of that today. But why don't we start with staffing, Matt? What's going on with staffing?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of change as far as CISA's workforce goes over the last little bit. And if you're watching, between people who have simply resigned from the organization, who have taken jobs in the public sector because, well, I mean, they're a little bit more stable at this point. Those who were laid off by the federal government, it looks like CISA is losing between 300 and 400 individual workers, which is about 10% of their overall workforce.
Yeah, that's going to be significant.
Yeah, that's pretty significant. And the other thing, too, is that a lot of the workers that were let go were hired by the Cybersecurity Talent Management System program. And that was a program that CISA put together to help bring private industry cybersecurity experts into CISA's ranks by offering things like competitive salaries to what you would get in the private industry, which in a lot of government positions you don't really get. But because of that, most of these employees were ranked as probationary or temporary employees, and that's why they were able to be axed so quickly.
Well, seeing on LinkedIn, there are a lot of extremely talented security professionals that are now entering the private sector, but we've lost them from our government and from this really their critical roles.
Well, exactly. Yeah, that level of talent is now gone from CISA, which is, again, one of those like crux elements of our national cybersecurity program, and that's tough.
So I was thinking, like, what is this going to impact? And I think one of the key things that's going to impact are the proactive services that CISA provides. So if you're not aware, CISA provides like free cybersecurity risk assessments, free vulnerability scanning, cyber hygiene scanning, I believe they call it. They do this for small businesses, for sectors, for the critical infrastructure. And so now that these organizations have been relying on their services, and they may not have access. CISA literally may not have enough staff to do all these. We'll see how it shakes out. But I think if you're an organization that has relied on those services, you need to be thinking about budgeting for them in the coming year, because they may not be available through the government. And this also affects our supply chain.
It does.
Yeah, because these smaller fish, small businesses, of course, are part of the supply chain for mid-sized and larger organizations. So just like when you sit down and eat a tuna and you get mercury, it affects, sorry, I don't know how much tuna you eat. It affects the risk to our whole infrastructure, and that's a problem.
Yeah, no, it's pretty tough. And I mean, one of the biggest things that we're probably going to see from this is a slowdown in how vulnerabilities get tracked, or the need to move away from the federal government kind of as the backbone for tracking these kind of things. And there's a lot of reasons why we want that to move quickly, and why it's really important that there's coordination between things like security vendors to actually, get out there and get these CVEs in place. We'll talk about what CVEs are here in a second.
Let's back up. Okay, so the big drama this month, you guys come closer. This is the tea. We're spilling the tea. The big drama, well, don't spill your tea. The big drama this month is that the funding that CISA provides to the MITRE organization was nearly cut. And you might be thinking, why do I care about this? And the answer is that MITRE is a CNA. They do numbering for vulnerabilities. So the idea is, if somebody discovers a vulnerability, like a researcher or a vendor or someone like that, they report it to a CNA, a CVE numbering authority. And that numbering authority will review it, vet it, make sure it's legitimate, and then if they accept it, they assign it a number. And that number is critical for everything that happens after that. So think about it. If there's a vulnerability in a product, that needs to be, obviously the vendor needs to manage it, all the customers need to be aware of it, they need to create a patch, vulnerability scanning providers need to be aware of it as well, so that they can scan for that vulnerability. Intrusion detection systems are often tracking that stuff. In fact, we were just talking to Tom Pohl, our head of penetration testing, who pointed out that products like firewalls and things like that, some Fortinet products in particular, are automatically using the CVE numbers in order to function on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, we saw this last year at a couple of the big conferences. Like some of the big security vendors, the ones that make actual, really popular high-priced security appliances for your network, they integrate directly with MITRE.
Yeah.
They pull that information on like an hourly basis from MITRE, so they're constantly up to date. And if that information's not there, those devices can be at risk for, they'd probably get patched eventually, but for a much longer time.
Well, it would be very hard to coordinate. I mean, think of it as like a house number, right? If you're a developer and you're building a new house, you're going to apply to get a street address, right? And if you don't get that street address, how are you going to get, the sewage hooked up? How are you going to get the water hooked up? How are you going to tell people where to go? And then how are people going to move in and the house is going to get sold and all that. So much of the process to detect and resolve a vulnerability is really dependent on this one detail, this assignment of a CVE. And again, without that funding from CISA, it doesn't happen, or it gets slowed down dramatically.
Well, it did, and that scared the security industry. And it was
chaotic and dangerous, or what Politico and Wired call it.
No, there was based on that potential lack of funding. Like the lack of funding didn't actually happen, and it won't for at least 11 months at this point.
Their contract was extended by 11 months, which freaks me out. We have to think about this next year.
But because of that, a day after that potential funding freeze was announced, there was the immediate formation of the CVE Foundation, which is a group of industry heads who are coming together basically to state that, okay, we may need an option here that's not funded by the federal government. We may need to look elsewhere for this kind of information, because if we can't rely on that funding and we don't know if this organization's actually going to exist or have it, we end up in a pretty bad position. We may need to look elsewhere.
Yeah, and so by the way, some other CNAs are Microsoft, major vendors. And so it's not the only organization that can assign vulnerabilities, but they are the leading organization. MITRE is the leading
They're
organization.
kind of the center point.
And it says something about how serious this is, that all of a sudden, within just a day of this issue, we see a nonprofit form to collect funds from this, or a foundation.
Exactly.
So what can we do about this? There's actually some stuff we can do to prepare and to make sure that you're ready in case of issues. So number one, you want to make sure that you're tracking on vendor advisories. Do not wait for CISA. I love their known and exploited vulnerabilities catalog. At first I was like, oh, this is cool that they've started tracking vulnerabilities that are actively being exploited in the wild. And now it's thousands, and it's very practical. For a lot of people, that is their face of CISA. You have IT managers or IT or security folks that are going to the known exploited vulnerabilities catalog on a daily basis just to see what's being reported and make sure that they're protected against it. So make sure that you're tracking on your vendor advisories and you know if there's a problem in something you rely on.
Yeah, the KEV is awesome. It's like a snapshot of what's happening in the cybercrime landscape at any given point in time. And it can be, again, really helpful. It updates really quickly. It gives you great descriptions of what the vulnerability actually is. So if there's something you can do to mitigate it, or if there's a patch available, all that information is there.
But we're trying not to talk it up too much, because we don't know if it's going to be around.
We don't know if it's going to exist here
Hopefully
soon.
At least 11 months. Yeah. But I know you also have one or two threat intelligence sources that are open source. I assume that means free. Is that right?
Yeah.
So what would you recommend?
So if we're talking about open source threat intel sources, Alien Vault or Level Blue, the actual software used to access it, is a pretty nice one to have in your back pocket. Again, it updates really quickly. It gives you great descriptions of what the vulnerabilities actually are and what you can do to stop them. Another one is CVE Trends. That one is pretty well known at this point. And again, it takes a little bit of work to get the API feed set up, but having them is incredibly valuable.
Yeah. And then we also have exploit intelligence feeds as well. So Gray Noise is one. I know you like Exploit DB. Is that correct?
Yeah, that one's really good.
Yeah. So if you're trying not to rely just on the tools that CISA provides, those are great substitutes for the known and exploited vulnerabilities catalog. And then, of course, make sure you're vulnerability scanning regularly. Again, we may not be able to rely on CISA for doing the cyber hygiene check and things like that for those of you that have been. And even if you're not relying on CISA, we need to move past that era where we did monthly vulnerability scans. You should be doing them continuously, by which I mean at least daily, and just making sure that they're updated. So Tenable is a great product, Rapid7, Qualys. If you're not sure where to get a vulnerability scanner, you can talk to us. We set those up for our clients. But regardless, just make sure you're vulnerability scanning on a regular basis.
Nice plug.
Yeah, thank you. You want to talk about the ISAC?
Yeah, so this was another big problem that we've identified recently, and that is the shaving of about $10 million worth of funding for the ISACs, which
that's more than a shaving.
Yeah. They're information sharing and analysis centers. So they're people who again facilitate that transfer of information between different organizations that helps us all stay safer when it comes to defending against vulnerabilities, spotting new attack trends. I mean, before we had CVEs and before we had organizations like this, there was basically a group of disparate companies that all had their own kind of threat intelligence systems and threat intelligence feeds. They didn't really cross-pollinate those. And it led to really kind of patchwork kind of defense when it came to stopping these attacks from happening in the first place. So having these ISACs in place, and I mean there's a ton of reasons to have them, but the primary reason is just getting that information flow going.
Right, and there's some for the finance sector, for healthcare. Yeah. You probably have an ISAC. If you're not aware of it, check it out. Definitely consider joining one while they're still active.
Yeah.
And if your ISAC is struggling, then certainly look into alternate community options as well. The bottom line is we're likely to see some real impacts to the cuts to CISA. I think we're going to see increased risk and increased cost, which is unfortunate. You hope that if you're spending more money, you're getting more out of it. But just the potential for delayed CVE assignments is scary. Reduced proactive services, reduced threat intelligence. Hackers are going to take advantage of this. And I think we're going to start to see more compromises as a result of that, don't you?
Yeah, completely agree.
Yeah. And then in terms of cost, obviously, if you're relying on CISA, you're going to start to see these services likely slowing down or not being available, which means that small businesses, critical infrastructure that rely on that have to budget accordingly, and that cost is going to get passed along to everybody that relies on those organizations, as will the risk. So just be aware that we may see security-related cost increases as well throughout our entire ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we were saying a little bit earlier. Imagine you have like an HVAC vendor, and they have a vulnerability, and they get infected, and then that infection leads to your network getting infected, and you lose like, what, 140 million?
Are you talking about Target?
No, yes.
Oh my God, that's so 5 minutes ago, by which I mean 2013, but it's true.
It's true, yeah.
Even an HVAC vendor can cause huge impacts.
Yeah, those little building blocks are important.
Those little building blocks. Okay, so what are our takeaways?
Don't wait for the government to help.
Don't wait for Washington. That's right. So assume, it's so sad, assume support for CISA and the ISACs, the information sharing centers, may be scaled back or slowed down. We need to plan accordingly, which is scary in these days when exploits are ramping up and going faster. By the way, if you're at RSA, we're going to be talking about how hackers are using artificial intelligence to find vulnerabilities and exploit you faster.
It's going to be a fun
Come find us and register for our session. Okay, second takeaway.
Map out your dependencies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, understand like what problems you may run into if you are behind on patching. Make sure that you have alternatives in place if MITRE is out of commission all of a sudden, or if CISA suddenly stops providing a service for you. A lot of like critical infrastructure, as an example, like a lot of those organizations run on like razor thin margins, and without those services available, they may not have the budget to actually pay for those kind of cybersecurity services from an outside public firm or something like that.
You know, CISA is like wireless on airplanes. I never expected it, but once we got it, I don't know what I'd do without it.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, I can't go without it now.
I just get angry. Okay, I honestly did not think we would be in this situation.
I didn't either.
Kind of crazy. Make sure you're budgeting for gaps. Be prepared to replace services that you may be getting for free or information sources that you currently have access to.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, another piece of advice we can give you, and our next point on this is, again, don't wait for the government, don't wait for Washington to come and provide you with intelligence, threat intelligence feeds or exploit intelligence feeds. There's a lot out there that are not government run that are very good. I'd suggest getting those feeds set up so that you at least have access to them.
Yep. Make sure you're prioritizing and preparing your response, especially to 0 days and software exploits. I think the biggest impact of these CISA funding cuts will be to slow down the process of getting information out, which means that patching will happen more slowly, and hackers are going to take advantage of that. So prepare your response to 0 days and software exploits, in addition to setting up your threat intelligence feeds.
Yeah. Finally, and I know this is not going to be great for a lot of the more techie listeners that we have, or the more IT focused people, but you're going to have to go be social.
Hey,
make
other people.
We do. Make connections with your local groups, though. Like, learn if there is a specific ISAC that you need to be a member of. Learn if there are local security groups that have their tendrils in the cybersecurity industry that can help you prepare or at least share information with you. I mean, it takes a community to secure our networks, and the more we build that community, the better off we are in the absence of these kind of unifying organizations like CISA.
It really does. Check Meetup. It's so valuable to just meet other like-minded information security professionals and swap information, inside info, so that you know how to handle things. And so that if there's a major problem, you can just pick up the phone and drop somebody a line and get some intel.
Plus, their parties are really fun.
I know. That's what I was saying. Like, IT folks, we know how to party.
Yeah.
All right. With that, I am Sherry Davidoff. This is
Matt Duran.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Cyberside Chats. Please like and subscribe. Thanks so much.